The discovery of Paige Birgfeld's car was the beginning of a mysterious story that began on the first Sunday of July 2007. On that day, a red Ford Focus that belonged to the missing Paige was discovered. However, the location where the car was found and its condition raised many questions and raised serious suspicions. The car was located in a remote area that Paige did not normally visit. Moreover, it was completely engulfed in flames of fire, suggesting that something terrible and strange had happened. The county district attorney of the county had been looking into what had happened with special scrutiny, and his preliminary findings indicated that the fire around the car was intentional. The conclusion was supported by the fact that nothing else had burned in the area. The unusual incident involving Paige Birgfeld's car was only the beginning of a much more complicated story. June 28, 2007 was a day that will always be remembered by Paige's family and friends. On this ordinary day, the young woman left her 3 children with friend Carol Linder home and left early in the morning. Nothing portended trouble, and no one could have imagined what would soon happen. Paige was a responsible mother and always called or came to pick up her children on time. Morning came, but Paige never returned to pick up her children. Attentive friends and relatives began trying to contact her, but all to no avail. 8-year-old Jez, the eldest of her children, took the initiative in searching for the missing woman. After sending several messages to her mom's phone and getting no response, she insisted on searching. With Carol, they went to the police station, where Jez reported that her mom had not returned for her. This call to the police was a key point in the beginning of the police investigation and search for Paige Birgfeld. With each passing hour, the concern of Paige's loved ones only grew. The community was shocked by this mysterious disappearance, and many were willing to make every effort to help in the search for Paige. Thus began a massive public search operation to return this young woman to her children and loved ones. That same day, the missing woman's father, Frank Birgfeld, received a disturbing call from an official with the sheriff's department. The message was brief and shocking. His daughter had disappeared. It became clear to Frank that something serious had happened. He tried to contact Paige, but there was no response. Terrified and desperate, Frank called his oldest son, Craig, who was on the other side of the country. Craig didn't hesitate to buy a one-way ticket and arrived in town, ready to help in the search for his sister. Family and loved ones joined forces with police and volunteers to begin a massive search. People from different neighborhoods began searching for Paige, combing the surrounding area, checking every corner where they could find any trace of her whereabouts. The police began scrutinizing Paige's history with her loved ones to see if they had anything to do with her disappearance. Of course, authorities turned their attention to Paige's relationship with her first husband, Howard Bigler. The story of that relationship began during her high school years. After graduating from high school, Paige enrolled in nursing school at the University of Florida, where she met a young man named Howard Bigler. Their feelings for each other proved to be mutual, and they began dating. After successfully earning her nursing degree, Paige returned to Colorado. There she continued to live with her family, but after some time, in 1995, she and Howard Bigler got married. At first glance, the spouses seemed to be a happy couple. They had many common interests and views on life. However, there was one significant rift in their relationship that eventually led to divorce. Paige dreamed of a child and wanted a family, however, Howard did not share her desire. The issue became a cause for arguments and conversations on numerous occasions. None of the attempts to find a compromise was not successful, and in 1997 the couple decided to part ways. Nevertheless, despite the divorce, their connection was strong, and the former spouses remained friends. Paige later married Rob Dixon, but their marriage also ended in divorce. After her divorce from Rob, Paige resumed communication with Howard. The missing woman's first husband claimed that he was one of the last people to see Paige alive. On the 28th, they met up in Eagle County, Colorado. It was due to personal business. There, they spent Thursday together. The former spouses then returned to their respective cities. Howard confirmed that they continued to communicate by phone after the meeting. Also, upon learning of Paige's disappearance, Howard immediately contacted emergency services. While speaking to the operator, he expressed his deep concern and belief that something terrible had happened to Paige. He noted that she would never leave her children without a good reason. The phone recording was corroborated by cell tower data showing that on the day Paige disappeared, Howard was in the Denver, Colorado area, which is several hours away from where she disappeared. This gave police officers reason to remove Howard from the list of suspects. Police began to scrupulously examine Paige's relationship with her second husband, Rob Dixon, and quickly uncovered many events that raised questions and warranted further investigation. It turned out that during their marriage, Paige had reported Rob to the police twice for harassment. After her divorce from her first husband, Paige took a job at a strip club in Denver, where she met Rob Dixon. The man was a wealthy man who had inherited a large fortune through his family's business. Having fallen in love with each other, Paige and Rob did not hesitate, and in 1998 entered into marriage. The family settled in a luxurious home in Colorado, where Paige fulfilled her dream of becoming a mother. A few years later, the couple already had 3 children, which became for the young mom the most important thing in her life. The first years of marriage seemed happy. Paige and Rob were immersed in the world of luxury, leading a well-to-do lifestyle. Suddenly, however, things began to fall apart, and the reason for this was due to the financial difficulties Rob was facing. Some of his family's businesses had serious problems, and as a result, the economic situation in the family deteriorated so much that Rob was forced to file for bankruptcy. The financial collapse led to a deep family crisis. By 2004, family tensions had reached such a point that Paige contacted emergency services twice. The first time, she reported that Rob had threatened to kill her and the children, but by the time the police arrived, she and Rob claimed to have worked through their problems on their own. A year later, there was a second incident that was quite different. Paige reported Rob for assault while claiming that he hit her while she was holding her youngest child. This time, Rob was arrested and charged with third-degree assault. He eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of molestation, but the trial was dismissed and Rob avoided jail time. The relationship between husband and wife was getting worse, and they decided to separate, after which Rob moved to Pennsylvania. Investigators interviewed Rob in an attempt to establish his alibi for the day Paige disappeared. Rob claimed that he was in his home and could not have harmed her. Ruling out his involvement in the disappearance, investigators could not. Rob eventually joined the search and was very active in trying to find Paige. Investigating officers spared no effort in an effort to find any clues to unravel this mysterious story and track down the missing mother. One of the first steps was a thorough examination of Paige's car. Based on the assumption that evidence could be found in the car that would help locate the woman, or at least understand what happened to her. Sergeant Weiler of the County Sheriff's Department said that arson is often used to destroy potential evidence. However, an examination of the vehicle provided experts with very valuable information. The driver's seat had been pushed back as far as it would go, indicating that the last person to drive the Ford was a tall man. Paige was short and couldn't have reached the pedals from that distance. In the trunk of the car, they found the missing woman's notebook, from which pages from June 26th through June 29th had been torn out. With each passing hour, the search for Paige grew more desperate. A few days after the burning car was discovered, a random driver stopped on a highway southeast of town for tire problems. A checkbook lying nearby caught his eye, and he immediately reported it to the authorities. While investigating that stretch of road, medical records, insurance cards, and other items belonging to Paige were also found. Sergeant Weiler discovered that several pages in the checkbook had been torn out, and the items were scattered a considerable distance apart. Most significant, however, was a business card found on the road. It became the key to revisiting the investigation. It turned out that Paige led a secret life that her loved ones had no idea about. According to the business card, the woman was an escort under the alias Carrie. This discovery called into question all previous assumptions in the investigation of Paige Birgfeld's disappearance. From that moment on, police officers were faced with new circumstances they had not even realized. After her divorce, Paige realized that from now on, she would have to work and earn as much as she could to provide for her children and meet their needs. She took a determined approach and started her own children's clothing business. At the same time, she taught dance lessons and sold kitchen supplies at a company. Despite her busy schedule, Paige always made time for her children, attended parent-teacher association meetings, and was active in school groups. A new discovery by the police turned the previous picture upside down. It turned out that Paige led a completely secretive life. She had a separate phone at her disposal, which she used for calls related to her professional activities. This phone became the key to unraveling a mystery that was far more complicated than even Paige's close friends and family could have imagined. Investigators' questions only multiplied. Why did such a conscientious mother and successful businesswoman decide to lead a double life? What did this secret profession have to do with her disappearance? All these questions became a priority in the investigation and added a new mystery to the investigation. Using a cell phone found in Paige's car, detectives accessed a list of contacts and calls made and received in the hours before the young woman's disappearance. The last call from that phone was made on June 28th at approximately 9 p.m. As a result of analyzing this information, 7 people were identified as suspects, and one of them was Lester Ralph Jones. Lester Jones's criminal history drew particular attention from investigators. He had a history of violence against a woman and kidnapping on his record. For the latter incident, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, that was not the only thing that alerted the police. His car was white in color, and from the external description was very similar to the car seen by Carol, Paige's friend. Carol shared important information with the detectives. She recounted an incident where Paige approached her car one day and saw another white car nearby that was blocking her driveway. Outraged, she got behind the wheel to turn around and drive away, but the cars collided, except that the unknown driver immediately fled the scene. With this information, investigators speculated that Lester may have been obsessed with Paige and following her. Further investigation revealed that Lester Jones attempted to make an appointment with Paige for intimate services the day before she disappeared. Lester was questioned and denied having any information about Paige's disappearance. He provided fingerprints and DNA samples. However, many suspicious items were found in Lester's home, including a disposable cell phone, men's wigs, Viagra, a sheet with the phone number of an escort service, and women's lingerie in various sizes. The disposable cell phone attracted particular attention from investigators. Analysis of call records on Paige's cell phone showed that on the day of her disappearance, someone tried to contact her several times from an unregistered number. Lester denied under questioning that he had a second cell phone. This meant he lied to the police. Using the packaging found at Lester's home, police were able to determine that the phone had nevertheless been purchased at a supermarket on North Avenue. Video footage from the store identified Lester as the purchaser. When he was shown the video footage, he refused to acknowledge that it depicted him. As a result of all this, Lester Jones became the prime suspect in Paige's disappearance. With no concrete evidence pointing to his guilt, the police continued to follow him and attempted to find Paige's body in order to have enough evidence to press charges. Case was put on hold for several years, and all the while, the young woman's family and loved ones were at a loss for grief. No one knew what had happened to the young mother, and the search seemed hopeless. As time went on, the hope that Paige would be found alive was dwindling. That all changed in 2012, when a hiker accidentally stumbled upon human remains in a ravine among rocks and bushes in Delta County. The find was discovered very close to the road where Paige's personal belongings had been found 5 years earlier. Experts who arrived on the scene were almost certain that it was the body of a young mother. The experts ran a DNA test, and the results confirmed that it was Paige. She was found, but it was a grisly end to her story. The exact cause of death could not be determined due to the condition of the body, but it was found that Paige had been struck many times as several of her bones were broken, particularly the bones in her face. As a result, it was determined that she died from injuries sustained during the beating. This information added to the horrific drama of the story. Paige's body was underground, and due to years of soil erosion, ended up on the surface. This may explain why she was not discovered earlier. Lester Ralph Jones's case came to a halt for several years after Paige's remains were discovered. In November 2014, he was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and second-degree murder. However, the trial didn't begin until July 2016 and lasted 22 days. Prosecutors argued that Lester, who already had a history of violence against women, was frustrated at not being able to see Paige after trying to get an appointment with her. The main witness for the prosecution was Lester's ex-wife, Lisa. She recounted how the man kidnapped her and threatened to kill her at gunpoint in the late 1990s. According to Lisa, Lester could not reconcile with her decision to break up with him. On one occasion, he attacked the couple with a gun in his hands, and Lisa's partner was shot in the head. A month later, Lester threatened her again, telling her that she would now end up at the bottom of a lake. However, the woman managed to escape and contacted police, leading to Lester's arrest on kidnapping and assault charges. Lester's defense attorneys tried to argue that the police detained an innocent man and suggested that Paige's other potential clients may have also had a motive for the crime. However, they did not present convincing evidence linking other individuals to the murder. Lester's current spouse also appeared before the jury and argued that although he used an escort service, she did not abandon her husband because of her faith. However, she did not provide him with an alibi and identified him from a surveillance video at a supermarket where Lester was buying a disposable phone. On September 9, 2016, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, and the first trial was declared a mistrial. However, the district attorney was convinced of Lester's guilt and wasn't about to give up. Over the next few days, he worked diligently on the investigation and re-examined all the evidence. On November 21, 2016, after reviewing the evidence, the jury finally reached a verdict. Lester was found guilty of all charges in connection with Paige's death. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. The defense appealed the sentence, but in June 2022, an appeals court panel upheld the sentence and affirmed Lester's guilt. Paige's final farewell was held on April 28, 2012. Her obituary dedicated beautiful words to her, describing her as a beautiful and radiant woman whose smile could be compared to the sun. Her tragic loss has left its mark on the hearts of her family and friends. Her 3 children were orphaned and had to endure the loss of their mother, who had always been their support and encouragement. Paige's case attracted public attention and dragged on for many years, but still the persistence and perseverance of relatives and law enforcement finally brought justice. Lester Ralph Jones was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now he will no longer be able to harm other people. Paige's story serves as a reminder of the importance of endeavoring to fight for justice, even if it takes a lot of time and effort. Her memory will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories on around the world ahead. This high-profile story took place in January 2023 in the state of Pennsylvania, Limerick Township. The township, named after the first settler William Evans, is one of thousands of small and cozy towns scattered across the country. Here, a measured and quiet life flows, and it seems that nothing can disturb this harmony. In such places, the inhabitants know each other by sight, and their friendship makes many of them one family. Jennifer and Blair's friendship began while they were working together. They were once business partners, collaborating on common projects. However, even after Blair decided to become a simple chef, their bond did not lose its strength. Their friendship grew beyond business and became more than just a working relationship. Their friendship took on a special significance because of Jennifer's 8-year-old son, Noah, who has autism. Blair had always given his friend genuine support and helped her in caring for Noah. Their children were also friends. They often spent time together, and when the children's games would run late, Noah would stay overnight at the Watts house. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, was an active and full of life woman. She was always smiling and exuded an energy that infected everyone around her. Friends and relatives often wondered how she managed to combine so many things and be active. But her true calling was motherhood. About the father of her son, Noah, nothing was known. But this situation did not overshadow their lives, but on the contrary, made Jennifer stronger, especially after Noah was diagnosed in early childhood with autism. Taking care of her young son, Jennifer became a reliable support and best friend for him. Mom and son were inseparable friends, spending a lot of time together, sharing moments of joy and supporting each other in times of need. This friendship between them evoked feelings of tenderness and admiration from all who knew their family. The people of the small town saw their closeness and adored this family for their cheerfulness and genuine kindness. Unfortunately, none of them could have anticipated what would happen to Jennifer one winter day. On January 3rd, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. On the morning of January 4th, 2023, the local Limerick Township Police Department received a disturbing call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson. He was deeply concerned about the disappearance of his close friend. Even though it had been less than 24 hours since he had last seen her or heard her voice, the anxiety inside him was growing by the minute. For hours now, Tony had tried unsuccessfully to contact Jennifer, but all his attempts had gone unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her. She was active and responsible, always answering calls or messages, especially in matters concerning her son Noah. However, on this day, for some reason, the boy's mom did not meet him after school. The missing person's family and friends were well aware of what a devoted mother and caring woman she was. Therefore, the sudden disappearance caused serious alarm to all who knew her and left no one indifferent. Antonio's call to the police was the first step in a long and mysterious investigation that would soon engulf the entire city and shake it with its tragedy. Immediately after Blair reported his girlfriend missing, a massive search began. Police officers, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any trace that might shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. It left many questions in the air, and the main one was, what could have caused the caring mom to leave her son without any explanation? At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department went to the Brown family home to check on what was going on in the family home. He found that her vehicle was parked by the porch, and upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, purse, tablet, and work cell phone were still in the house. However, the officer was unable to locate Jennifer's personal cell phone. Later, when police tried to track it down, it was discovered that the phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and could not be traced since then. The last location the signal came from was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in the town of Limerick. This was the first serious trace in the investigation and a sign that something terrible had happened to Jennifer. She was reported missing and police began investigating the case. Investigators began questioning her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything at the time Jennifer disappeared. None of the young woman's loved ones or acquaintances, however, could provide any useful information. Her aunt, Diane Brem, and Jennifer's friends, Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts, claimed that there was no way the young mother would have left alone, as she could not leave her son alone. This was a woman full of devotion and love for her child. All efforts made by the authorities and volunteers were fruitless. They could not find any traces or clues as to where Jennifer might have been. Her loved ones appealed to the public through the media for any information on the possible whereabouts of the young woman. A reward was set up, but that too was inconclusive. The case of Jennifer Brown's mysterious disappearance was just beginning to develop, leaving investigators and family with questions and anxious expectations. The police investigation began with a close look at all the circumstances of that day, and her close friend Blair Watts, who was the last person to see Jennifer alive that day, came to the forefront. It was an ordinary January day. Jennifer and Blair sat in the cozy living room discussing life, future plans, and their children. Their children often played together, and Jennifer had asked her friend for help to pick up her son Noah from school so they could spend the evening together. This was a common practice for friends. Blair, being the loyal friend that he was, agreed, and after finishing their conversation, immediately headed to the school to pick up Noah. The next day, however, something strange happened. At school, Noah behaved unusually and caused his teachers concern. They noticed that the boy had missed 2 doses of his medication that helped him manage his condition due to his illness. This was highly unusual, as Jennifer had always been a devoted mother, never neglecting her son's caregiving responsibilities and always being in touch with teachers if anything happened at school. The school staff tried to find out where his mom was, and was told by Noah that she had gone to the grocery store and had not returned. This caused even more concern, as this behavior of a sensitive woman was very uncharacteristic. She never left her son alone. At this time, Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, also tried unsuccessfully to contact her. After not hearing back or contacting Jennifer, Blair decided to see if she would show up to pick up her son from the bus stop. However, when the woman never showed up and concern grew by the minute, Blair had no choice but to go to the police and report his friend missing. As time passed, no new information about the possible whereabouts of the missing woman had emerged since the investigation began. Hopes for her return were fading with each passing day. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace and might never be found. But on January 18th, 2 weeks after her disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford, in the neighboring municipality of Limerick Township, discovered something strange. They came out of the building to get coffee and saw what appeared to be a freshly dug hole in front of them. When they went closer to inspect it, they were horrified to find the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who immediately arrived at the burial site. Upon examining the body, police identified the young woman they had been searching for the past 2 weeks as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff called her family and informed them that the missing woman's body had been found partially buried near a warehouse in Roseford. An autopsy revealed that Jennifer's death was clearly violent. Death was due to asphyxiation, and she had 3 broken ribs. This indicated that Jennifer had probably struggled with her killer, who had beaten her to subdue her. Now the nature of the investigation changed. The missing person case was reclassified as a murder case. Police once again began interviewing everyone who was close to the murdered woman, including her family and friends. However, these interviews yielded no new information about the case, and the police had no suspects. It seemed as if the investigation was about to wind down and the police had no one to follow up on. But later, when detectives least expected it, they got a lead from an unexpected source. After the news of Jennifer's disappearance and murder was published, the police called for anyone who had any information that could help unravel this mysterious story to come forward to investigators. Noah's teacher came to that call. She recalled a case that at first glance seemed unimportant to her, but after Jennifer's death was recognized, raised serious suspicions. The teacher said that Noah shared with her an important detail about that terrible day, January 4th, when Jennifer disappeared. Little Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, the boy noticed that among Blair's belongings was his mom's personal cell phone. Noah recognized it immediately, as the lock screen displayed his own childhood photo. That moment turned out to be key in the investigation into the young woman's murder. Previously, investigators had already assumed that Jennifer's killer carried away her cell phone. Now Blair Watts came into the spotlight, becoming the main suspect. The police began to scrutinize the relationship between Jennifer and Blair, and mysterious details began to come out, shocking even experienced investigators. Jennifer and Tony's friendship seemed solid and long-standing. They spent a lot of time together, knew each other well, and their families interacted with each other. But once the business side of their relationship came to light, it turned out there was a dark history lurking beneath the mask of friendship. Blair Watts was the owner of a restaurant called Birdie's Kitchen, which unfortunately fell into disrepair and closed in early 2022. After this, Blair turned to his friend, asking her for help. In August 2022, Jennifer decided to invest in her friend's business to help him revive Birdie's Kitchen in a new location. They entered into a contract that stipulated that Jennifer would provide regular financial contributions to keep the restaurant going every 6 weeks or so in order to rebuild Birdie's Kitchen and get it back on the market. According to Blair, from August through January, Jennifer turned over approximately $36,000 to him to rebuild the business. They also agreed that she would hand him another $9,000, according to their agreement. Blair found a new location for the restaurant and was to deposit some of the money as rent, enter into a contract, and reopen Birdie's Kitchen in January 2023. However, it turned out that the money provided for the investment was spent on Blair's personal needs. The property owners with whom he had entered into the agreement drew attention to his failure to fulfill his financial obligations. Therefore, on December 26, 2022, they terminated the agreement with him. Blair found himself in a desperate situation. He lost not only his money, but also the opportunity to open his restaurant. The police began to suspect that in desperation he had decided to commit a terrible crime to save his business. Looking closely at the financial transaction history on Jennifer's iPad, investigators discovered 2 unauthorized transfers of $17,000 to Bertie's Kitchen on January 3rd. The funds were not included in the formal agreement between Brown and Blair. In addition, the transfers failed several times and were only successful after the 2-factor authentication system on the iPad was disabled, which increasingly pointed to Jennifer's friend's involvement in her murder. Police then interviewed the owners of the property, who had terminated their lease with Blair. It turned out that on January 4th, the very day Blair reported Jennifer missing, he appeared before them, saying he had the funds to enter into a lease agreement. Investigators were convinced that Blair was the killer. However, realizing that he would never admit his guilt, they needed to gather irrefutable evidence. Their first step was to interview Blair's wife, Tiara Taylor, and find out where Blair was the day Jennifer disappeared. Tiara told detectives that on January 3rd, Blair visited the Brown family around 1 p.m. and did not return home until 4:30 a.m., when he picked up Noah from the bus stop. Tiara also claimed that her husband came home only briefly and then left again around 5 p.m. and did not return until late that night. This time frame became a key point. Further investigation revealed that Blair had spent the night with Tatiana Garrett, his mistress, and did not meet up with her until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 and 8 p.m., Blair had no alibi. Based on the available evidence, detectives put together an alleged chronology of the murder. According to their version, on January 3rd, Blair went to Jennifer's house while Noah was at school at about 1 p.m. and allegedly killed her. He then made 2 transfers of funds from the murdered woman's iPad to his account and left to pick up Noah from the bus stop around 4 p.m. Later, he returned to Jennifer's house, dropped Noah off, and traveled back to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. From there, the killer made his way to Tatiana's house, where he spent the rest of the night. Everything was carefully planned, and it would seem that the murderer might have gone unnoticed had it not been for one mistake he made, and it proved fatal. That mistake was letting Noah see his mother's cell phone. That was the key moment that led the police directly to Blair. Law enforcement now had enough evidence to convict Blair, but they decided to investigate further to see if he was guilty. It took the involvement of film experts and a specially trained dog capable of detecting cadaveric odors indoors. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's home so that it could memorize the woman's scent. There, in her own kitchen, the terrible crime had taken place. The police then directed the dog to Blair's car, and it instantly detected the same depressing odor. It was the last piece of evidence needed to bolster detectives' confidence in Blair's involvement in the murder. On February 8th, after months of investigation, Blair was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, and theft. He is currently incarcerated at the Montgomery County Correctional Facility with no bail application and awaiting a preliminary hearing where he will have to answer for his horrific acts before the law. Jennifer's friends and family were on the brink of despair when they discovered her dead, but their hearts are still pierced by the pain and shock that the killer was someone they knew and trusted, someone who should have been a close friend to Jennifer and her son. But now that the killer has been identified and brought to justice, they can finally feel that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's who spoke on behalf of the family, expressed her feelings during the interview. "I still dream about Jennifer. Noah keeps asking about my mom, and I don't know what to say. At the conclusion of the investigation and trial, if Blair is found guilty, he will spend the rest of his life in custody. The case was solved thanks to the attentiveness of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. The boy noticed a mistake made by the killer. This helped to discover the truth and punish the criminal. The tragedy in Limerick Township serves as another reminder that even the most carefully planned crimes will sooner or later be solved. Meanness and inhumanity will not go unpunished, and the perpetrators will sooner or later be brought to justice before the law. Paula Andrea Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela. Her mother, Andrina Bermudos Midland, was from Maturina, Menegas. Her father, Leonardo Salazar, was from Tucupitu, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year after Paula was born in September 2016, the couple decided to immigrate with their child to Ecuador. They were looking for a better life for themselves and their daughter a month after moving to Quito, capital of Ecuador. Relationship in the family deteriorated for a number of reasons. Andreina decided to break up with Leonardo and soon moved to Cuenca, the third largest city in Ecuador. She took Paula with her. In Cuenca lived the mother of her best friend, who kindly offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they found another place to live and work. Leonardo, the girl's father, given the breakup and other circumstances, decided to return to Venezuela, to his hometown of Tucupitu, and after a while immigrated again, this time to Trinidad, Tobago. At the time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a long time. The man's left arm had been completely disabled after an accident he had suffered while driving a motorcycle at a very young age. Since the man could not use his left arm, it was apparently difficult for him to find a good job even in Ecuador's capital city. After Andreina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she has taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after separating from Leonardo, Andreina entered into a new romantic relationship with a man named Washington Andreas Aymaro. Andreas was a local Ecuadorian, and more importantly, he was the owner of the farm where Andreina worked. The man grew up in a wealthy family. When Paula was about a year and a half, Andreina moved to a man together with Paula. Andreas and Andreina had a child together on April 7, 2019. With a newborn baby, family became happier and more united. However, everything changed when an event happened on March 27, 2020. It completely changed the lives of everyone involved. At the time, family was living well, enjoying every day, and things were going well on the farm. On one such day, as happy as it seemed, Andreas took Paula and by car went with her to the flower plantations. On the way there, girl got very sick. She became dizzy and began to vomit. Andreas had no choice but to stop at a public restroom. As soon as he and the girl entered it, Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes and went back to the car to find a change of clothes, since the girl's clothes were all dirty. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl, and the man immediately pulled the girl out, tried to give her first aid, and soon brought her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was handed over to doctors, she no longer showed any signs of life. Doctors stated, Paula dead. After the doctors on duty performed an initial examination and assessed the girl's condition, they realized that the story Andreas told them was full of inconsistencies. For example, the doctors determined that the first glance that the girl had bruises on her body and face, the nature of which could not be attributed to the information her foster father told them. Medical protocol in such cases requires doctors to contact the police. Indeed, the situation itself suggested this. Shortly after the police arrived, Andreas was arrested as a suspect in Paula's murder. Although Andreas said Paula has drowned in the toilet bowl, the autopsy of the body revealed something much darker. First of all, the test showed that the girl had been dead for about 24 hours when she arrived at the hospital, which doesn't fit with the man's version of events. The girl's foster father claims that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. On the other hand, the autopsy found that the girl has several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body has a significant number of both recent and old injuries. Leonardo Salazar, the girl's father, learned of Paula's death on March 30, 3 days after the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had informed him of his daughter's death by the phone. She herself, in turn, learned it from Andreina's friend. It should be mentioned that after Leonardo has left Ecuador and Andreina had started a new relationship, she stopped all communication with him. That is why, for 3 days, Leonardo didn't know anything about her tragedy. Until that time, he could see her only through the pictures Andreina and his mutual friends had sent him. In addition, Andreina blocked Leonardo in all social media, preventing him from communicating with Paula. She also cut off communication with almost all of Leonardo's relatives. Andreina even turned almost all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father, telling them about his lack of desire to communicate with Paula, and so Leonardo was able to learn of his daughter's death. However, Andreina's family informed him of an alternative cause of death. They told him that Paula died of complications caused by COVID. At the time, Ecuador, like the rest of the world, was under quarantine due to the pandemic. At the time, however, there were virtually no deaths from the coronavirus in the country. Leonardo was undoubtedly very suspicious that his daughter might have died from COVID, so he immediately began researching statistics on death from the virus in Ecuador. The statistics were posted on social media and news websites. Leonardo immediately noticed that there were no children among the few victims of the coronavirus in Ecuador. Leonardo's relatives helped him to investigate, and one of them soon sent him a newspaper article that mentioned the arrest of Andreas, who was suspected of killing Paula. Leonardo then began calling Andreina daily, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to call him back herself. In that conversation, Andreina rather coldly informs Leonardo that Paula had died of COVID and that she could not give him more information because her lawyers had forbidden her to do so. The next step Leonardo took was to create a Facebook page together with an acquaintance of his dedicated to Paula, as well as an Instagram profile called Justice for Paula. The published posts caused a huge backlash across social media. Their main goal was to bring those responsible for his daughter's death to justice. On the same day that Andreina called Leonardo, she arrived at the morgue to begin dealing with her daughter's funeral, even though the prosecutor, who worked on the case, asked for more time to investigate the body. But the girl's funeral took place on April 10th, 2020. Andreina simply did not allow a second autopsy to be performed on the girl. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andreina's friends, people in her circle, contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather, as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrea allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone, in the presence of her stepfather. The girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because of she misbehaved. One day she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. The couple initially preferred that the girl, who was 2 years old at the time of moving into the stepfather's home, sleep alone. When falling asleep, she often cried, but no one paid any attention to her. In addition, her mother and stepfather forced her to tuck in on her own, without help. Moreover, her mother, Andreina, had been teaching her how to cook since she was 2 years old. This was something out of the realm of reason. Paula was forced to cook her own breakfast and dinners because her mother liked to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby on the evening. She simply didn't want to take care of her daughter. Not only that, Andreina was not bothered by the fact that the girl has to cope with baking oven by herself, despite the dangers. At the preschool, where mother had placed Paula, girl constantly complained of pain in her legs and back and often stated that she could not walk. Her constant complaints, as well as the bruises on her body, forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, They concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. The girl's teachers then called the special police organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. As a result, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andreina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4, 2019. Unfortunately, the teachers who were supposed to testify never showed up. For whatever reason, they were unable to attend this hearing. As a result, it was decided to schedule a retrial for February 27, 2020. But even this time, Paula's teachers simply did not show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and then she was returned to her mother. Exactly 1 month later, on March 27, the girl died. And the exact reason the teachers did not want to attend either of the two hearings is still unknown. It is speculated that Andreina may have bribed the teachers or simply convinced them that, although the girl had some problems, the parents were not responsible for what their daughter said about them. After Paula's death, Andreas was placed in protective custody for the duration of the investigation, but he soon appealed this decision. As a result, a hearing was held on June 12, 2020, in which the judge set a restraining order and also determined that the man could be released to house arrest. But during the hearing, which was held via video conference, Andreas announced that he was dropping his appeal. At the time, Leonardo was still engaged in a social media campaign. He also asked his subscribers for financial support to be able to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador. He wanted to file a complaint against Andreina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andreina had not yet been charged and was free. Fortunately, Leonardo was able to obtain sufficient financial aid as well as free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Osvaldo and Alejandro, who unselfishly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela. He had to risk his life, float on the raft, and then cross the entire border from Naturín to San Cristobal. He had to book private transfers since the pandemic had cancelled all services and he could not use the usual routes to get to Ecuador. Because of the pandemic situation, all maritime and land borders of Venezuela were closed, so only few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries could be counted in the following months. Once Leonardo arrived in the state of Táchira, he had to cross the border into Colombia over rugged terrain, dangerous in itself. He then took a bus to the town of Ipalerso and continued on through the hills and plains to the Rumichet Ridge, the border between Colombia and Ecuador. Then Leonardo took a cab and drove to Quito. On June 30, he had a meeting with a lawyer. Immediately upon arrival, father of a deceased girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend to also be considered as a suspect in Paula's murder. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted and the woman appeared in court, which stated that she should not be remained in custody and the house arrest would be sufficient and that she had to report to justice twice a week. As a result, both Andreas and Andreina were charged with murder. The maximum punishment for which in the Ecuadorian Penal Code was about 13 years in prison. In November 2020, the first hearing in the case was held. At the time, a specific date for the start of the trial was still to be announced. During the hearing, Leonardo's attorney spoke to their concern about Andreina's possible escape, as she had previously attempted to take her own life with pills. They also applied for Andreina to be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge decided to grant the lawyer's request and also reduced the number of days the suspect had to appear in court to once a week instead of 2. However, a few days later, Andreina demanded to reconsider the decision of the necessity of wearing an electronic bracelet. On November 16, another hearing was held to reconsider these decisions. Undoubtedly, all these details delayed the trial, but fortunately, the judge was able to set a date. It was set for December. The trial of Andreas and Andreina did not receive extensive media coverage. However, much of the information somehow made its way onto social media, And yet, because of the pandemic, which was a major topic in the information field, some of the facts went unreported. The trial began on January 14, 2021. At the time, there still wasn't any decision made about Andreina's alternative ways of imprisonment, and Andreas was held in the regional detention center. The trial was held behind closed doors, and no representative of the media was present. In addition, some of the participants connected to the hearing via video link. According to the doctor who performed the autopsy on the girl, Paula had nearly all of her spinal discs rebuilt, some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused. This meant that the girl has broken ribs before, which had eventually healed on their own. She also had nail stigmata, a condition in which the nails grow into the skin, bruises and scratches on her face and body, fluid accumulation in her lungs, scars on her head, and lacerations on her colon. According to the assessment, it was the later injuries that caused the infection to develop and gradually lead to sepsis, which ultimately caused death. The autopsy report also confirmed that by the time Paula was taken to the hospital by Andreas, she had been dead for about 24 hours. The amount of internal and external injuries reflected the level of cruelty to which the little girl had been subjected, as well as the level of carelessness shown by her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctors. On top of this, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too diminutive for her age, with mineral and nutritional deficiencies. Regarding Paula's injuries, Andreina, the girl's mother, tried to convince her family friends that the child has a lot of psychological problems, and that the consequence of these problems was a tendency to self-torture, through which Paula tried to attract attention to herself. According to the girl's mother, when her younger brother was born, Paula began to lack parental attention, stopped sleeping at night, and tried to manipulate everyone through crying. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to remain in her uncle's custody, according to the board's decision, she actually continued to stay at her parents' house and only slept at her uncle's house for a few nights. In other words, the measures taken by the police organization did not have the desired effect. In turn, it was possible to establish that in 2017, only a few months after Leonardo's departure from Ecuador, the girl began to suffer from abuse. It most likely began immediately after Andreina enters into relationship with Andreas. The trial was attended by more than 40 witnesses of the accusing party, who were able to confirm the fact that Paula had to endure abuse for at least 3 years of her short life. At the last hearing, before the judge handed down the verdict, Andreina stated that she took sole responsibility for the child's abuse. The woman claimed that she herself had beaten Paula with a belt and at times with her fists. Through this statement, the girl's mother actually attempted to remove blame from her land. She said to Rekbeat that he was innocent, that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andreina also stated that she chastised her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband. Breaking up with her new husband meant being back on the streets and losing the financial stability she could only have around this man. Taking care of her daughter was her last priority. After becoming acquainted with Paula's life situation, the judges were concerned about the couple's newborn son, but it's safe to say that this child, unlike Paula, was never abused. It must be said that Andreas has indeed chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and has never made any statement about the incident since his arrest. By the February 3rd, 2021, Paula's trial was finished and the couple was sentenced. Both defendants were found guilty of murdering the girl. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years. Leonardo's original attorneys and the accusing party demanded exactly the maximum punishment for the perpetrators, but the chief judge decided to take into account an aggravating factor, namely that Paula was only 4 years old, which means that she could not defend herself against her attackers. As a result, the judge sentenced Andreina and Andreas to 17 years and 4 months in prison. According to Ecuadorian law, the convicts have 3 days to appeal the verdict. so the couple was expected to appeal immediately, even though Andreina was sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison. She still remained on house arrest and not went to jail. The fact is that the woman used her opportunity to appeal, so now the higher court needs to confirm her sentence for incarceration. In the meantime, the woman continues to comply with the measures that were originally taken. This is not the case with Andreas, as he was arrested at the time of his appearance at the hospital with the dead girl. Undoubtedly, the fact that Andreina is still at large is causing public indignation and anger. Most importantly, the anger of Leonardo, who is worried that the woman might take advantage of the situation to escape justice.
In the spring of 2016, in the quiet town of Fort Worth, located in the state of Texas, there was a brutal and cynical murder that shocked even the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Paula Arellano, who worked as a paramedic, and you will be shocked to learn who was her executioner. The circumstances of the tragedy were so strange that at first the police even put forward the theory that Elizabeth may have voluntarily passed away. However, such a theory did not fit with the testimony of people who became accidental witnesses of the terrible scene. The investigation had to do a lot of hard work to understand everything and send the criminal to the dock. However, given the brutality of the crime he committed, the sentence handed down seemed too lenient and unfair to many. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born in 1987, August 16th, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her 2 sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young. He showed no interest in the fate of his daughter and did not contact her in any way. Soon her mother, Juanita, remarried to a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. The girl studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a guy named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon had a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents, but they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen daughter seemed to them a man serious and quite reliable. At the age of 16 years, barely out of school, Elizabeth married her lover legally. The couple, one after another, had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. But despite the appearance of numerous heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a housewife. She remembered her childhood dream, so Elizabeth graduated from medical school and got a job as a paramedic, planning to get a higher education to become a doctor. The young woman was kind and pious, brought up in Christian traditions. She regularly took her children to church, instilling in them love and compassion for their neighbors. Family and friends characterized her as a very responsive person, always ready to help. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph seemed strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to literally crack at the seams. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife before, trying to control her in everything, but over time his behavior became simply unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to the house of her parents. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his fits of anger. In addition, she did not want the children almost every day to listen to the parents' scandals, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits, and in order to distract herself from family problems and a little divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So, on Friday evening, April 15th, 2016, the 28-year-old young mother in the company of her friends went to a fun place. There she danced and had a good time, but did not touch alcohol because she planned to get home in her own car, on which she arrived at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. Having parked the car, she called her friend, with whom she had vacationed at the club that night, and told her that she had already reached home and that she was all right. Elizabeth then hung up the phone, but never entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was very worried when she found her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth was planning to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned long ago. She couldn't leave somewhere unannounced, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that Elizabeth had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, it turned out that it was not locked. The key was still sticking in the ignition, and inside on the seat were her daughter's purse and cell phone. Naturally, she couldn't leave her personal belongings in the open car like that, which meant that something terrible had happened. The woman immediately called the police, reporting a missing person. The police believed that they would be able to solve the case, as they call it, on hot tracks. In addition, there was still hope that Elizabeth was alive, because there was no blood or signs of struggle in the car. But it wasn't that simple. The first thing was to reconstruct in the smallest detail the chronology of the events of that evening and night, to trace Elizabeth's entire route, to find and question all possible witnesses. First, friends and colleagues of the young woman with whom she had spent the evening before her disappearance were interviewed. They gave the exact time when she went home, and later Elizabeth herself called back, saying that she had reached the place safely. In addition, several calls and messages from her ex-husband Rudolph Arellano, who had persistently tried to contact her that night, were found in the missing person's cell phone, but Elizabeth never answered him. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to the man, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. The man assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years. She was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of a young mother, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. The man said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4:30 in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so the man could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then a version was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives, who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. But who and for what reason could have so brutally massacred a mother of many children? Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone guarded her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of the deceased continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the number of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, the man put on an act. He wept at the coffin of his ex-wife, saying that he would like to be in her place or die with her. According to his sister Elizabeth, she even believed in the sincerity of his words. In addition, Rudolph actively helped in the creation of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the ceremony of farewell to his wife. But after the funeral, when the man was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. After a detailed examination of all the CCTV footage from the last route Elizabeth took, it was determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from her parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near the deceased's house. Their neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road not far from the deceased's house. Moreover, it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which the woman had been thrown. This circumstance raised many questions, and when the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data on the night of the crime, the questions became even more. It turned out that the man made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's place of work, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. Apparently, he had been following her and eventually decided to wait for her return at Elizabeth's parents' house. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son. When the boy was shown the rope removed from his mother's neck, the son stated that he had seen it earlier in the backyard of his father's house and remembered it well because he had played with it. Moreover, the boy also recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before after the fence had been replaced. Also, small fragments of this concrete were found in the trunk of the car belonging to Rudolph. The investigation found that the man waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete. Afterward, he drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Rudolph Arellano was taken into custody 10 days after his ex-wife's body was recovered from the lake. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death. And then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke indifferently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison, without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, but noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of the deceased woman's children,